We are recording this session and we will get that posted on the Spark website as soon as we can. And these slides are already posted on the Spark website, so you can go back and view them at your pleasure. So hello, welcome. Welcome to another round of our regional webinars. I wasn't sure last year that we would actually be doing this again, but here we are. So thank you for joining us. As always, we hope we have some good information for you, and hope that we're able to answer some of the questions that we've been seeing from the counties across the state. As is typical, we have an agenda for you this morning, and we'll be going through those slides, myself and the TAs. And then, of course, after the slides are done, we will have time for your questions, comments, and complaints. So without further ado, we're going to get started. You can see on the screen our agenda for today. As we have done in the past, we'll just very briefly sort of walk through what the actual spend down looks like from the county so far based on the reports that were submitted in February. Obviously, with the March 1st deadline, the actual spend down should be 100% for counties across the state unless you've received an extension from us for supply chain issues. But we can give you sort of a snapshot of what that looked like with your February reports that were submitted in February. We're going to talk about what disbursements after March 1st, 2021, say that fast 3 times, what those should look like, and talk about guidance for CRF interest. We will address the March 1st exceptions, closeout documentation guidance, liquidation of assets, and then we want to talk through what some next steps might look like for this group. So next slide, and at this point we'll turn it over to, not sure who's doing this slide,
Erin.
but Erin. Okay, thanks, Erin. Sorry. Turn it over to Erin, and she will walk through this slide with you.
No problem. Good morning. As we've done in our past webinars, we wanted to give you sort of that high-level snapshot of how the counties are doing across Kansas. And as Doug mentioned, this would be as of January 31st expenditures. So there's some good news here. 38 of our counties by January 31st had 100% of their allocation spent. 64 counties had spent more than 75%. So they were getting there. And of those, 45 counties were within 95% of their allocation spent. We did have 3 counties that are still working through their allocations that are below the 75% line, but you can see that's a pretty small proportion of the counties. Overall, there's 24.1 million that remains to be spent, and that's the round 1 CRF funding. And we do know that many of those counties, for example, out of the 64 that have more than 75% of their allocation spent, many of them have earmarked the remaining funds for single audit, consultants, or supply chain delays, which we'll be addressing later in the webinar. And those funds are to be expended by June 15th of 2021. So if Doug doesn't have any remaining comments, then I will turn it over to Martha.
I don't, Erin,
talk
so go
about
ahead.
Expenditures past March 1.
Yeah,
Martha?
thank you.
Okay, thanks.
You briefly about what should be appearing on your next report, which is due between now and 5 p.m. on March the 17th. So what is being reflected on that report is anything that you have dispersed, written a check for through March the 1st. Allocated funds that are not spent by the 1st must be used specifically for payment of your single audit, any consultant and or supply service vendors where you have documented a disruption or delay of receipts. Again, we will stress you need to make sure you've documented all of your disruptions in receiving the items, in delay of delivery, and also that would support your writing them a check after March the 1st. In the change memo that will accompany your upcoming report, you need to contain a description of expenses that will be encumbered or to be paid after March 1st. If you could please list the amount of each payment or encumbrance, such as the amount that you will be paying for your single audit, or the amount you will be paying Henry Schein, for example, for medical supplies, and also list when you anticipate paying them. Do not put your encumbrances on the CRF Excel report. We only want to see this as a description in your change memo. We will make a note of that and then look at your June report to make sure it has all been expensed. Payments after March 1st are to be shown, of course, then as unreconciled funds and cash on hand in the boxes on page 1. So for example, if you still have $20,000 left as of the end of the day, March 1st, and it's going to be paid for the single audit, that $20,000 will show as unreconciled funds in your funding opportunity box on page 1, and in the monthly spending box on page 1, and then in the bottom box, cash on hand, also of $20,000. You will describe in the change memo what this $20,000 is for and when you plan on writing the check to the auditor or the supplier or the consultant or all of the above. Next slide. So we're also going to address that some of you have placed your allocation into an interest-bearing account. We understand that, and that's perfectly okay. And that's interest that you're earning between March 1st and December 31st, 2021. However, this is not to appear on your CRF Excel form or the change memo. You will need to keep this as a separate record and available should your own auditor, the state of Kansas, or the federal auditors ask you, did you gain interest on this deposit? You will then have to show in a separate record that you spent that interest on any CRF eligible goods and services, such as PPE, payroll, etc., by the end of this year. This again is a separate record and not to be contained on your CRF Excel form or in a change memo. If you have any questions about reporting between now and next Wednesday, always contact your TA by email and Doug, and also any questions about how to handle any interest you have accrued from this award. The TA will be happy to help you and how to keep that separate record so it can be audited. Next will be, I believe, is, I can't remember who's doing this one, sorry.
Brad.
It's Brad, thank you.
Thanks, Martha. Hello, everyone. I'm Brad Cantor, the TA for Regions 5 and 6, and today I'll be running through March 1st exceptions. As we've discussed, and Martha covered a little bit of this as well, the spend down deadline was March 1st, 2021. It just passed. If you needed exceptions, we need to be made aware of that in advance of that March 1st for supply chain issues. So that should have been already submitted via email to Doug Gerber and to your TA. I know we've had a number of those already submitted, so thank you for those who've done that. If you have submitted those requests, you should have received approval or denial communicated by Doug Gerber. However, if you haven't heard from us, please inform us immediately and we will get you an answer. As for how to report these expenditures, what we need is for you to just please include the description of the approved exception and the amount of funds to be expended in your March 17th change memo. And in addition, so again, what I would kind of return to that. The change memo is where you're going to be putting this information for anything that was allowed an exception. In addition, have documentation to substantiate that delay and or the disruption, including but not limited to vendor notice, purchase order, or invoice to verify that purchase of goods and services were made prior to that March 1st, 2021 deadline. I know some of my counties have discussed this with me as well. So if you have any questions about that, again, reach out to your TAs or Doug and Doug. And the final piece is payment of approved exceptions must be made and included on the CRF expense report due June 15th, 2021. So just to kind of wrap up, if you have your exception granted to us or you put it in, you haven't heard from us, please reach out. If you have been approved of it, keep track of it in the change memo that you send to us. And this will also be put into the CRF for the June 15th, 2021 report. So reach out to your TA and Doug, should you have any questions. With that, I'm going to hand it off to, I believe it's Emmy, to discuss closeout documentation.
Thank you, Brad. I am Emmy Cormier. I'm the TA for Region 8, and I'm just going to go over some documentation that we recommend you have on hand to substantiate any of your expenses, things that you don't need to hand off to the state of Kansas, but that you want to keep inside as a county record. So we've put together a checklist tool that we distributed to everybody in January, and it does contain some documentation, record retention recommendations, as well as a good checklist on how to fill out your reporting template. So definitely a good tool to use when you're filling out your March 17th report. General best practices for documentation and audit expectations can include documentation for each expenditure or reimbursement. That can include things like purchase orders, invoices, receipts, a check ledger, payroll reports, contracts for services, MOAs, etc. You also want to make sure that you have an explanation of steps taken for any capital outlay or project purchases, which could include a copy of a county acquisition or capital purchase policy, and especially if you've made any exemptions or exceptions to your normal purchasing policy before COVID that you've declared during an emergency, you want to make sure that those are memorialized in writing, because if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. And you want to verify that all projects, goods, and services were that you procured with CRF funding were previously unbudgeted. So make sure it was not specifically included in your budget that was approved or adopted by a governing body before March 27th, 2020. That is obviously one of the 3 key elements that makes you CRF eligible. So it's really important that you go back to your budgets that were approved on or before March 27, 2020, and make sure that the things that you funded with CRF funds were not already in your budget. So we also have provided a memo called the Kansas Capital Projects Real Estate Memo. This was emailed to you guys several months back. I believe it was around November. It is on the Spark site. Leslie, to answer your question, this is the new county resources. The recovery office has redone the Spark website a little bit, and they've moved things around a little bit and made it more streamlined. So this is the new hot link for where your county resources are. And if you'll scroll down to the bottom, you'll see where the memos that we provided, including the capital projects memo. And it outlines step by step, if you remember, the things that you need to consider before you actually make a large property purchase or improvement or very large purchase. So it lists specific documentation and specific steps you need to take and how to memorialize those steps in writing to really bona fide that large purchase or large construction project. So the document acquisition of real property improvements or renovations. You want to make sure that new building or acquisitions or new equipment acquisitions, including your vehicles necessary to respond to COVID-19 public health emergency, have the necessary documents to back up the reasoning behind that purchase versus, say, a lease. Document options and alternatives considered. You want to include how the county ruled out responding to public health needs in a different, perhaps more cost-effective manner by, for example, leasing property, acquiring smaller equipment, or improving existing owned property by the county. For more specific guidance and more Treasury guidance, you want to refer to Treasury's FAQ number A58 for guidance on real property improvements and acquisitions along with the equipment acquisitions. And again, our memo does a nice little high level walkthrough of exactly which thought process you need to go through and which documentations you can have to substantiate that process. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Claire, and she's going to talk about liquidating assets.
Good morning. I'm Claire Collins. I'm the TA for Regions 2 and 3. I'm pleased to be on to tell you about liquidation of assets. The federal rules address the proceeds of disposition or sale of assets acquired with CRF funding. This applies to every county and their subrecipients. Also, the proceeds from CRF funded assets disposed of prior to December 31st, 2021 are subject to restrictions on eligible use included in Section 601D of the Social Security Act. That portion of the Act addresses that the cost are necessary expenditures incurred during the public health emergency with respect to COVID-19, and that those expenditures were not accounted for in the budget recently approved as of March 27, 2020. In addition, that those expenses were incurred during the period that begins March 1, 2020 and ends in 2021. So I'm going to give for an example. If you actually had a vehicle that you purchased back in November with CRF funding, and it met all the guidance, that CRF guidance, then, and you decide to dispose of it before December 31st, 2021, the assets from that disposal then would need to be utilized for expenditures related to COVID-19, so that it would show that you had expended those funds. For more information with regard to this, see Treasury Frequently Asked Questions number B5 for guidance on liquidation assets. And as always, the TAs welcome any questions. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over now to Doug Gerber, who will talk about next steps.
All right, thank you, Claire. Thank you for that information. So this slide that you have in front of you is likely to generate a lot of questions, and we may not have the answers for those right now, but honestly, we just want to introduce to you what we think is likely to happen and let you know that you will be getting more, better, and complete information from the Recovery Office in the very near future. So I think by now everyone is probably aware that there is an additional round of funding coming. It's been approved by the Senate, and the House is likely to approve it perhaps even today, and it's likely to be signed by the end of the week. It is $2 trillion in new funds, and I typed out that number just for a visual representation, and it even kind of shocked me with 2 with 12 zeros. That's a big number. So there's some new funds coming, and it's likely to include direct payments to a number of governing units in Kansas, including counties, cities, townships, and school districts. Again, like I said from the beginning of the slide, you will be getting contacted directly and through the Kansas Association of Counties once the bill gets finalized, and we'll have a webinar call with counties to discuss what this is likely going to look like. Again, it's not determined, but we anticipate this being in the very near future, that it will be reaching out to you and having a call. Next slide, please. Next slide. Emmy. Thank you. So in terms of also next steps, as counties are transitioning away from this first round of spending and getting all their funds spent, we just want to reiterate that the lines of communication remain open. So don't hesitate to reach out. There's the email addresses for all of the TAs, including the TA that you've been working with. Additionally, I am transitioning away from the Recovery Office. I'm still helping out the Recovery Office at this point, at least probably through the end of March. So we're all still available for you to provide assistance to you. And it's certainly fair to say from my perspective, I will be available after that, but maybe not necessarily with the Recovery Office. So Again, we're kind of winding down and just want to let you know that we are still here to help, though, and want to make sure that you have the information you need and get the questions answered that you would like to have answered. So with that, we will conclude this presentation formally. And now we will actually get into the fun part for all of us, the meat of the presentation. Well, we're here for your questions, comments, and as I always like to joke about, we'll even take complaints today. It looks like we have a few in chat and we can go through those, and then whatever else pops into your mind. So let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, so Leslie's asking for the new link. If one of my colleagues on the TA team could please pop that in the chat, and then Bradley will make sure to email that to her later as well. I'm in my presentation mode. I can't get out of here and go copy paste it. If somebody will pop that in the chat for me, please. Okay, so Karen wants to know exactly what is meant by a separate record for interest earned. So that was going to be just a normal county, anything that you have as your normal county records that you're not giving back to the state. So the same things that we talked about before, you're going to have a lot of supporting documents that you keep within county records for your CRF expenditures that you don't give to the state. One of those supporting documents that you need is a recordization of how you spent any interest earned on CRF funds. And a friendly reminder, you have to spend them on CRF eligible items. So hopefully that'll answer your question, Karen.
Yeah, I think Karen also, from the beginning, the recovery office discouraged folks from having interest-bearing accounts, but if you did, it's really kind of as simple as your bank statement too, is just showing the interest that was earned on those funds, and then just tying back and making sure that that interest was spent on CRF eligible expenses.
Okay, Heather says, what happens if you get rid of things after 12/30/21? Are there no rules? Doug, I'll let you answer this one.
Okay. I mean, the guidance does talk about that through 2021 for this round of funding, that things have to be used for CRF eligible expenses. After that, it's a little less clear, but it seems to be that you can use them for normal uses within your county or whatever your subrecipient is. So I wouldn't say that there are no rules, Heather, but it's certainly less clear that they have to be used for CRF eligible expenses after that. And I'm not sure I understand the second part of your question. Does this imply that the county and city funds will flow through the state? Are you talking
I think this was about the new
for the
new
money?
round of funding.
Yeah, again, I think that is up in the air right now, Heather, although it does appear that some of these payments will be directly made to cities and counties. Others may not be so direct. But again, once this all gets flushed out and everything gets finalized, we will be in front of you immediately to have those conversations.
Okay, Leslie, if you don't mind, I'm going to take your second question first and get to the other two in the chat, and then I'll get back to your county specific questions. Okay. So Leslie wants to know, did all of the videos of the webinars get preserved, and are they reachable by us? Yes, they are still on the Spark website. It's a new URL. So if you'll follow the URL that someone put in the chat, you'll see that the webinars are still there. The videos of them and the slides are still accessible. And as far as I know, they'll be memorialized until. So they are still accessible by anybody who needs them in the public, and including everybody on this webinar.
That's correct.
Okay, Karen said.
And as far as your
Karen
first part of the question, Leslie, let's hold off your unmuting until the end, and then perhaps we can have that conversation about some of your items specifically. Go ahead, Emmy.
Okay, Karen says, would you expect similar procedures and reporting for the next round of county spending?
Yes, no, maybe. Karen, it really depends. Again, I think some of these monies will flow directly to the counties, and so the level of reporting at the to the state may look different or non-existent, but that's going to be determined once everything gets finalized. And again, we'll get in front of you guys as soon as we know the very specific answers on that.
Okay, Sue says, will KAC provide support on American Rescue funding?
Sue, that is a good question. And I think, I don't know if anybody from KAC is on here. I would assume they would be able to give you some guidance and support on this, but, and I know that our folks at the recovery office and the leadership there has been talking to KAC. So I know those conversations have happened. And so working to get everybody on the same page with that, but what that's going to look like is yet to be determined. If everybody sort of thinks back to maybe the first round of webinars, which I wasn't on and the TAs weren't on, but clear back last June or whenever those happened, kind of what it looked like. There were a lot of questions, a lot more questions than answers. And I think that's the case right now, is there's a lot more questions than answers. But once some of that starts to be fleshed out a little better, then again, we'll get in front of you and provide those answers as best we can.
It's important to remember that it hasn't been signed yet, so there still could be changes within the legislation itself, and that's going to make other changes in a ripple effect. So we don't have answers yet because we don't have a finalized bill either. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, Heather said that I would assume, since this is really a direct appropriation to cities and counties, that this whole reporting procedure won't continue, but that the state may be the pass-through. Is this correct?
Heather, again, it's just, as Emmy just said, since nothing's been signed, hate to sort of make these assumptions and give out bad information, but it does look like that if there's a direct appropriation, there may not actually be a pass-through. So, but again, that remains to be seen, and we'll flush that out once we have a signed bill and better answers as to what it actually looks like.
Okay, Karen says that our remaining funds, including our interest, total $10,000, which is the bid for our audit. So Karen, what you would do is you would give us the information for whatever your cash on hand for what that equaled your allotment that you spent on your audit. So you reduce that $10,000 by the interest earned and only present to us what is the actual total of your allotment. And the recordization that you have for that audit that includes the $10,000, that's a sufficient record to include, to have on the county level for both your allotment for us and the interest earned if they do actually equal the total. Okay, let's see. Heather says, I have seen the city and county spreadsheets from DC. Do you have them that you could share? Doug, do you have access to that?
I do not, Heather. I'll be a broken record though. Once we have that information, we will make sure we get it out to the counties either directly or through KAC so that everybody gets it when we have the information finalized.
Okay, so Leslie says, thank you for the link. Did the last video ever get posted? I know there was a delay. I haven't looked lately, but I wanted access to it. As far as I know, the last webinar is there, and then today's webinar will get posted before the end of the week.
We'll double check on that though,
All right.
Leslie. There was a time in the recovery office where the person who typically did that was leaving, and there was a delay, and I'll check and make sure it got followed up on.
All right, Scott says, in many different federal funds for governments in the past, if you spent over $5,000 for capital assets, you had to keep a listing of those assets. And then you sold the assets within a certain time span over the years, the amount had to be paid back to the federal government. For example, I have heard of school buildings that were built with federal funds and then sold when the school closed. Those sale proceeds had to be paid back to the federal government. Big shock for the school district. I hadn't thought about it for Spark funding and how the sale of the assets will be handled after 12/31/21. If we see anything, Scott's firm, I will try to get it to the state recovery office. Thank you, Scott. We
That's
haven't
great,
seen anything
Scott.
either. And as soon as we have guidance, we would of course push that out to counties and let everybody know as soon as possible.
Yeah, but again, to reiterate, the guidance we have right now is through 2021. So that's what's addressed. Beyond that, it appears to be, you can use the assets as you see fit, but there may be, as everyone on this call knows, we've given you guidance, and then a week later, we've gotten new guidance from Treasury or somebody else, and it's changed. Doesn't seem likely that that's going to happen, but it's always a possibility. So the advice that we've given everyone throughout this process to stay fluid remains very consistent and appropriate.
And it's important just to make sure that we both keep the lines of communication open. So when you do see emails from the recovery office, it will contain hopefully really important updated information and the best that we know at the time that we know it. Heather says that she wants the sheet estimates of what each county and city will receive under the new bill. As far as I know, the only thing that I have seen is a county level, and it's been on NACO's website. And it's, again, the numbers are still fluid. There still might be changes, so it's just an estimate. And I haven't seen anything about municipalities or anything less than a county. I've only seen it at the county level. So I don't know if anybody else has seen anything more specific.
Yeah, I certainly haven't, but we'll get those once they come out and are finalized.
Okay, well, Heather, if you got a link to that, it would be obviously very educational to everybody. She says she has seen the county and city. If you can pop the link in the chat, that would be lovely, and we can definitely take a look at it. Okay, Leslie, I'm going to scroll back up to your questions. Let's see what we've got. Okay, there's a few 28, but the check was cut in March. So have at it, Leslie.
Okay. Thank you, Emmy. So it wasn't too many things, but one example is payroll incurred that was paid on the March 5th pay date. I had already started our and gotten real far along on our final report, and I had that in as expenditure. I mean, I had emailed with Doug about that, and also checks on the 5th and the 12th that paid for items, CRF eligible items that were clearly incurred in February or prior. So I wasn't really expecting those to show as unreconciled and not be reported until until June. So can you give me any guidance on that?
Incurred expenses in February that you've written the checks for before, especially before March 17th, should be listed on your March 17th report, because the incurred date is before March 1st.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense to me. Now, we did we only pay on Fridays, so our not paycheck, but the accounts payable check is actually going to be on March 19th, but it'll be approved by our commissioners on the 16th. And so when I file on the 17th, I can already have a check number. The checks just won't be in the mail yet. So, I mean, it would be easiest for me to go ahead and include that and not have anything left over till the June report. So I don't know if we're splitting hairs on that or.
No, that's actually a really good call out. And that's definitely the preference, is to make sure that you can report as many things as possible on your March 17th report, so that you're only leaving off.
Okay, well, that is extremely helpful. I mean, for one thing, so I would prefer to be finished, not fall then, but it was definitely incurred. And I've already communicated it's related to PPE. So I really like that concept of being able to get everything that was incurred in February onto this March report.
Yes, and that should be what's happened throughout the reporting, is anything that was incurred within the reporting period or covered within the reporting period should be reported on that next report. So the last few things that you're reserving for your audit and your consultant and any pre-approved supply chain, that is what you'll hold off, list in your change memo, and then tell us about in June. Otherwise, fit as much as everything possible, especially if it was incurred within the time period in your next report.
Oh, that's really great. I appreciate that. This is not related to Forte. Can I go ahead and ask you?
Sure.
Okay. On the Nexus to COVID column on the spreadsheet, Brad, if you're still on the call, I was trying to comply with what you emailed me about, and I don't know if I have the right takeaway or not. So if y'all can just weigh in on this, I'd appreciate it. I was thinking that you were advising me in the column for next to COVID-19 that no matter what we might have described or explained, if I didn't actually have the phrase COVID-19 embedded in that cell as like PPE, as opposed to make sure the words COVID-19 are in that cell on every expenditure for the county and the external. So I just want to make sure I didn't overreact. Is that actually what you meant?
Brad, if you're able to unmute yourself and kind of address this personally, would you mind? Looks like he might be having some tech issues. I don't think it's necessary to specifically mention COVID-19, but you wanted to provide a sufficient enough nexus, right? So a lot of times people do. I will say that I have seen across counties, they'll consistently say, you know, disinfecting areas because of COVID-19, disinfecting this, payroll to, you know, able to, you know, address COVID-19. It wouldn't hurt to make sure that you're always addressing it as a clear nexus to COVID. Is it necessary to say the word COVID 6,000 times? Probably not, but you want to make sure that you're covering as much of your bases as possible. So if Brad has come back to you with some specific things that he says, let's get a more robust nexus, then that's definitely something you want to take a look at. So that's part of what the TAs are doing this month, and the exercise that we're doing in our deep dive of these last few reports is to make sure that we're providing line by line specific feedback about any tweaks or changes or substantiations that we recommend you have in your report to get those T's crossed and those I's dotted. So Brad's the guy who's got the best look about your report, some specific cells.
I'll jump in here real quick, and I think
there's
that's
a little
all Brad
delay
was,
between.
Yeah, sorry. I think that's all Brad was trying to say, is that there needed to be maybe just a more robust nexus. Your report is good, Leslie. You don't have to worry about that. I think he was just suggesting maybe a more robust nexus.
Well, I don't want to fail to do something that's crossing the T's and dotting the I's if it would put the county in a worse position, you know? So, you know, I might be able to invest an hour and, you know, the issue will go away. So I just was curious. On the checklist that you all mentioned is going to be out there, and I think your PowerPoint included part of it about what we should check back and make sure we have documentation on. Related to whether something was budgeted or not, there's an awfully big exception about payroll for, you know, health department employees, first responders, you know, my time. Is that going to be addressed in the checklist? Because if you went just on the PowerPoint today, you wouldn't have any sense that that exception exists, and it's, you know, you made my blood run cold.
That's a very good call out, Leslie, and you're right. That little asterisk footnote should be included. So the exceptions previously unbudgeted would be things like payroll for people who are substantially dedicated to responding
Yeah.
or partially dedicated to responding to the pandemic.
Okay.
But the important thing you want to make sure is part of that recordization to back that up is you want to make sure that you are listing the specific duties associated with that person. So it may not necessarily be sufficient to just say, well, they work in public health. Well, you want to make sure that you've got at least a sentence or two describing what job duties that they did that were substantially dedicated to COVID-19, right? You want to always make sure that you're bringing it back and creating that nexus to the pandemic, to COVID-19, making sure that it's clear that every expense, including every person in payroll that you're using, has some sort of connection written down to COVID-19.
And I would also say, remember that the checklist,
Let me, I need
that
to
we
just jump in, this is Brad.
the checklist that we presented last time is meant to be taken in whole, also with the other memos that were put out, such as the payroll memo. So don't be afraid to refer back to that.
Me, can I just jump in? This is Brad.
Okay. Okay.
And I was going to say that Brad apologizes that his computer crashed right when you started talking, but he's back on. So I'll let him address that really quick.
Okay. Thank you.
Or not. Okay, we'll come back to that. Hopefully, guys, you guys have each other's emails. You can definitely connect over that. I'm sure he'd be happy to handle.
Yeah.
Brad, is this a good enough nexus? And he should provide feedback right away. So that's definitely something, a specific question and answer that Brad can answer for you for your county.
So
Okay. That's great.
the other thing I would say for the entire group's benefit is it looks like there was a link posted in the chat to some of those spreadsheets, and Heather has also sent me something, and I'll take a look at it and try to get it out to everybody as well.
Yeah, Stacy posted a link to the NACO site that I was talking about earlier that referred to at least the county level, and then we can all take a look at it and click around and see what we can see. With the asterisk, once again, the legislation hasn't actually been signed and passed all the way, so those numbers could be that they will, but it's still a touchdown yet. So, okay, if there aren't any more questions, lines of communication.
You hear me?
Yes. Hey, Brad.
Oh, man, this has been a lot of computer problems here. Sorry about that. Yeah, I agree with everything everybody said, Leslie. What I was trying to get across was we just need some level of detail. Some of them were just PPE, and I understand going through every single one of them is a little bit cumbersome. So, yeah, I mean, if you have PPE and there's a similar purchases around the document that kind of go more into the direct connection, then we're good. And just send me ones that you're curious about, and I'll just give them the thumbs up on them. Some of them were just like single words that didn't have direct enough ties. So just the robustness just needs to basically cite COVID-19. But again, just send it to me, and I'll give you a thumbs up for the ones you're not sure about. But overall, the reports look
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, as Emmy said, unless there's any other questions, we appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you, as is usual, for a robust discussion. Thanks, Leslie, for your questions, keeping us on our toes. And we'll conclude the way we always do, that don't be afraid to reach out. We are here to help, so contact us, and we will provide the assistance that we can. Hope everybody has a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.